Welcome to the first video for the Animation Master 2005 Training Animation DVD. In this tutorial I'm going to go through some very simple kind of an introduction to animating in Animation Master. First of all, we're going to talk about the interface and how you use the animation tools. One of the first things that I need to do is I need to go up to Tools and go to Options, and I need to go under Action, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually leave everything the same except for Smart Force Key. I'm going to uncheck that. What that does is it basically uses a zero slope when you create a keyframe, and we'll talk about that a little later, but I want to do that before I do anything else. The other things that you can do in here are with your modeling, your units. I always turn it to frames elapsed, so I start at frame 0 and go from there. Some people like to work in SMPTE, which is time. So it's your hours, minutes, seconds, frames. I always start with frames elapsed, so I start at 0 and I keep my default frame rate at 30 frames a second. Mainly because I'm working digitally, and anything that is NTSC or that I'm doing online will usually use 30 frames a second. That's about it for that. Now I want to see my timeline, and this toolbar down here is the animation toolbar, and it's grayed out because we don't have any animation in it. So I'm going to actually right click in my project workspace and click on timeline. Now it will open up the timeline below here. So I'm going to go up to project, click new, and that will just open up this section in your project workspace. First of all, in Animation Master there are two ways of animating. There is animating in what's called actions, and then there's animating in what's called choreographies. Animating in actions is almost like it's a separate entity or a separate piece of information away from a scene. Now if you're used to working in Maya or something like that, your MB file that you create is basically a scene. You put different characters in, all your objects are in the same thing, and you animate that way. You can reference objects, whatever. An action is basically a piece of animation that you want to stand by itself, that you could repeat, that you could loop, anything like that that you would want to do. It doesn't even have to repeat or loop, but it's a separate piece of animation. In a choreography, this is like your scene in Maya, where you have a camera, you have lights, you have objects all over the place, you have interaction between different models, and you have different models doing different animations. This is a place where you can stack actions. You can put actions in choreographies on characters to allow them to move according to those actions and independent of the animation that you put in a choreography. Most of the time when I'm animating, depending on what I'm doing, I'm working in actions if it's a looping action, or in a choreography when I'm doing like cinematic animation where I'm animating to sound, or I'm animating a scene, or I've got multiple characters or a character throwing a ball up in the air, something like that. I'm using a choreography. In actions you can do things called action objects, and we'll talk about those, but I never really use them. I always go into choreographies because it seems to just work so much better when you want to do it that way. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load an object. So I right click on objects, I say import model, and browse to the content folder of your DVD and pick the ball. Now this ball will come in as a model. Now make sure that under View, you have Workbook chosen. That will give you a tab down here. Now here's my ball. This ball is just a sphere, and if I go into bones mode, you'll notice it just has one bone starting at the origin and going to the top. That bone is what I'm going to use to animate it. So I don't really need to see the model, but I'll leave it up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new action. So I'm going to double click on the actions folder, and it automatically will bring in this ball. Now if I have multiple objects in here and I double click an action, it will ask me which object I want to use. So this one, just by default, it was a ball because that was the only model there. Now you can see how down in my timeline the action is set in there. I can click on shortcut to ball. If I open up the action, it says shortcut to ball. Now this is exactly what it says. It's not the ball, it's a shortcut to it, but within there I have all my options that I can set, all the surface attributes, options on it, all this kind of thing, transform. These all are only good inside the action. They are not good on the object. If I want the object to actually inherit that, I have to go into the object and do it. Anything that I do on a shortcut is only for that shortcut. So I could actually change the surface attributes, do all kinds of stuff in an action, and keyframe any of these attributes. And by doing so, I'm not changing the object at all, I'm just changing the shortcut. Most of the time, all I'm going to be using in an action is the bones. I really don't like to animate stuff in a in an action other than the bones, because I will either do that in choreography or I will do that in the model. That's just the way I like to work. But if somebody had the desire to animate in an action, that'd be fine. You could do that. So now you notice here, once I clicked on the bone, under the shortcut to ball, there's a bones folder, and inside that bone, or inside that bones folder, is the bone. Now this has the animation data on it. Now I haven't set any keyframes, and what I want to talk about right now is these down here. This is your keyframe or your animation toolbar, and depending on how you set it up before you open Animation Master, or after you've opened it, I can put it down here at the bottom. I can put it kind of wherever I want to. I tend to like to use it right about here, because I like to deal with my keyframes and just be able to use my animation buttons right here. Let me go through the buttons real quick. All these buttons tell you what you're keying. When they're clicked down, it means you're keying whatever is clicked down. So this is translation, scale, rotation. This is any sort of constraint that you have in your animation. You can key that. This is muscle animation, or in other words, point information like morph targets or anything like that. Morph targets are a little bit different in Hash because they're actually on the model, but you can key that. You can key the bias on the graph. You can key pose sliders. You can key everything else. And then this is key a bone, the key branch, and then the entire model. This is force a keyframe on anything, so if I click that bone and click force a keyframe, it'll do it. That only works if you already have a keyframe set on that object. And then this is delete the keyframe. Right here is where you can scrub your animation. This will go back to the previous keyframe. This will go back a frame. This tells you what frame you're on. This, of course, plays the range that you've set up. This is repeating it, and then this is the opposite. So next frame and next keyframe. Now down here in my timeline, you'll notice right here is my values. I'm in graph mode right now, and that's this button right here. If I want to go into dope sheet mode or keyframe mode, I click on this button, and it will show me my keyframes. This right here will zoom the extent, so if I have keyframes all the way through frame 100, I can click this and it will zoom to frame 100. This button right here is actually zoom on the Y, or keep it constrained on the Y. And I like that when I'm working in the graph editor, because that means I don't have graphs that go off of the grid. They always stay within the grid here, and I can always find them. This right here is just your marquee select. This is your move tool, and this is your zoom tool, and then this is your marquee select, or this is your just your pointer. Now the navigation in here is the same as it is in your view. If I middle click and hold down and move, it pans. If I middle click here and move back and forth, it pans. Okay. If I zoom here, if I roll to zoom here, I zoom, or I click in here and I zoom here and it zooms in. Also, if I hit Z in this window, I can click and drag and it zooms. Same thing here. If I'm in this window and I click Z, it will, or hit Z and click, it will zoom. So most of the time I don't ever use Z. I just roll my mouse button and I use the middle mouse button to pan. And that's pretty much all I use for navigation in here. But I always keep this zoom on the Y, fit on the Y clicked, so that I don't have to worry about looking at graphs that go off the charts and then I have to pan up and down and around. They'll always stay here. Now in the timeline you have your play range. If I right click on it, I go to play range settings, and I can start wherever I want and end wherever I want. I'm going to end at 30. Now you'll notice that the graph turned green right here and the marker went all the way to 30. Now I can click on this and scrub just like this, and then my play range, I can actually go up here and left click and drag my play range wherever I want. Now I can do the same thing here, so I can grab this play, oops, let's do this, grab this play range and set it to wherever I want it to go to. So that's basically how you use your play range settings and your timeline. Like I said, this is the graph editor, this is your dope sheet, and I mainly stay in my graph editor because I find that I can see what I'm doing, I can see what my animation is doing better in the graph editor. Although I love using a dope sheet for moving keyframes around. It makes it really nice when you want to grab a chunk of keyframes and just slide them around, or copy a chunk, you can do that. Really, it just really works well. Now, since I've talked about all that, what I want to do now is I want to go through and do a quick tutorial on simple keyframing using this ball. So that will be the next tutorial that we go through.